Good afternoon and welcome back to Bob Rovner Talks of the Stars. Today's a special day for our show because we have my favorite governor, my favorite mayor, one of my top two DAs here. He's 24 years in public service, Ed Rendell, and he wrote a wonderful book that I'm going to recommend that you all get. A Nation of Wusses. Now you see him. He's on CNBC. He's on so many shows. He did, and he's been my friend. We go way back. We have a lot in common. Ed Rendell and I graduated high school in '61, college in '65, law school in '68, and I'm proud in '68 we were sworn in together by then DA Arlen Specter when we were young. Ed was 24, I was 25, and Specter was only 37 or 38, and I gave that picture to his son Jesse because Ed Rendell, Jesse looks a lot like Ed did at that age, and Jesse's told me that the other day. So Ed Rendell was my first guest on the radio approximately 20 years ago. In 1992, he became the mayor, 100th and some mayor. He was the 45th governor, and he was my first guest back in 1992, and it was great. Now, what I will do, and I want to tell you this, because a lot of you listen to me every Friday, I want to tell you this show is being, and the reason Governor Rendell is here, I said, because I wanted to get him in the studio, I said, I wouldn't just have you call in if it was just, I wouldn't have you here for just the radio, but we're going to get TV here. So I'm proud. Pennsylvania Cable Network, our friend Corey is here. They're taping the show. It'll be aired several times, but the first time will be Tuesday, this coming Tuesday, June 12th, and that's at 7 o'clock, 7 to 8. So you'll watch that, and Ed Rendell also will be on Sunday night because Brian, the president of PCN, interviewed him for another show. Ed Rendell, thank you so much for being here, and Nation of Wusses is a great book. It's your first book, so you tell us about it. Go ahead.
Well, before I do that, Bob, I want to tell our audience, just in the interest of fairness, that as Bob alluded to, we are almost lifelong friends. And I have to tell you that you always remember your inauguration. I did remember my inauguration as mayor, but my inauguration as governor, after the ceremony, there's a parade. Now, that day in Harrisburg, it was January 20th, 1993, and it was freezing. It was, did I say 1993? I meant 2003. It was freezing. It had to be 20, 18 degrees, and I stood out there for 5 hours watching the parade. And the parade is by county. You start with Adams County, which is the first alphabetically, but the home county goes last. So I was waiting for my home county, Philadelphia, after all 66 counties, and Philadelphia comes around the bend, around the corner, and the first thing that catches my eye is Bob Rovner walking arm in arm with Hooter. And for those of you who don't know who Hooter is the Temple mascot, the Temple Owl, Hooter. And Bob and Hooter, I have a great picture of Bob and Hooter walking behind the Capitol in that inaugural parade, and it made my heart warm no matter how cold the temperature was. Well, Bob, I decided to write this book, one, because I had some things I wanted to say about the state of the American democracy. I do think we're in trouble. We're in trouble because we've become too polarized, too partisan, and we're in trouble because it seems like elected officials today are afraid of offending the people, afraid of offending their base. All they want to do is get reelected, and they don't care about anything else. I have a chapter in the book that I title Stand and Defend. There are some things worth losing for. And if you're running for political office and there isn't anything you want to do or get accomplished that you think is worth risking your office, then do us a favor, don't run. And we have become a nation of wusses in Washington, in Harrisburg, in Albany, in Sacramento. It's the case. We are so interested in self-preservation that nobody protects anybody. I'll give you the perfect example, Bob, and it's one you and I have discussed. Clearly, the nation needs to do something about our deficit. It could get to $15 trillion by 2020 if we don't do something about it. Now, everybody in the Palace of Truth and Justice knows that means we have to have spending cuts, and there's not enough money in domestic discretionary spending. If we're going to get the spending cuts we need to cut and reduce and reform some of the entitlement programs. My guys, the Democrats, we're too afraid to tell seniors the truth. And the truth is, when Medicare and Social Security were put into law, the average life expectancy was 65, 66, 67. Today, the average life expectancy is 85, 86. And obviously, those programs have to be changed. We've got to reform them, make them less expensive. And I think seniors are realistic, they're smart, and I think they will listen to that and understand. On the other side of the coin, the Republicans, they're afraid to confront a little guy by the name of Grover Nordquist. He's the guy who makes all of them sign this no tax pledge, and they're afraid to violate that. They're afraid of what the repercussions are. But everybody in the country knows that we can't get out of this fix just on cutting spending. We need to increase revenue, and we can do it by just eliminating tax loopholes. 20 years ago, Bob, tax loopholes cost the American taxpayer $800 billion. Today, it costs the American taxpayer over $1.6 trillion, meaning they've doubled in 20 years. Of course, we have to do something to increase revenue, and we need our elected officials, whoever our next president is, President Obama or Governor Romney, to have the courage to lead and get this stuff done. And that's why I titled it Nation of Wusses after the comment I made after the Eagles canceled a football game.
Minnesota Eagles 2010.
December 26th. We canceled a football game for snow before one drop of snow had fallen. At kickoff, there were less than 6 inches on the ground in Philadelphia, 2 inches in Delaware, 4 inches in Montgomery County. And Tom Hanks said in the movie League of Their Own, there's no crying in baseball. Well, I said, there's no canceling football games for bad weather. That's the essence of football. Anybody who's ever played football knows you play regardless of the weather. All of the Eagles players wanted to play the game. It was a decision that was driven by lawyers and insurance brokers. We just don't take any risks anymore as a country, and we need to do it. But one of the other things I did in the book, I wanted people, Bob, to get an idea of what a wonderful, wacky, often fun, despite all of the challenges and all of the frustrations, life in public service is. So I told some very, very funny stories, some actually that I can't tell on the air, but they're funny stories about life in politics, about some of the hypocrisies. And, you know, I did some things that I always wanted to do. I love David Letterman and the top 10 list.
Right.
So I had my own top 10 list, which was top 10 reasons politicians are wusses. That's, I think, one of the last chapters in the book. I had fun writing this. I wrote it all. I wrote it in longhand, and I didn't have anybody help me write it. I had a great time putting it together. I love writing the titles for my chapter. There's one chapter about when Louis Farrakhan and I had a prayer service to avoid a race riot in Grays Ferry.
You explained that well. People were upset that Louis Farrakhan was with you, but you said there could have been problems if you
we could have had a race riot.
Minus, it became a plus. Tell us about that.
And the chapter's title is "What's a Nice Jewish Boy Doing Holding Hands with Louis Farrakhan?" There was all sorts of racial problems in Grays Ferry that stemmed from some white guys beating up a black woman who lived in Grays Ferry. The Muslim nation threatened to have a march through the heart of Grays Ferry, 25,000 strong. I knew if that happened with racial tensions the way they were, there was a likelihood we'd have a race riot, or worse, somebody could fire a gun from one of the houses along the parade route. Minister Farrakhan could have been assassinated himself, and all hell would have broke loose. So I wrote Minister Farrakhan. I said, the march is dangerous. I explained why. Let's have a service in a church in which we make the points we need to make. I'll be there with you. We'll have other religious leaders with you. Minister Farrakhan said yes. There was no real major march through Grays Ferry. At the church service, Minister Farrakhan gave a great speech. He said to the African-American audience, it's all right to condemn the white guys who beat up this black woman, but I want you to be just as strong condemning black men who every Sunday night beat up their wives and girlfriends. Don't let them get a free pass, too. It was a message that people had to hear. He did a great job, and everything's going swimmingly. He complimented me. I think I made a good speech. I couldn't have been more pleased. But then as we're about to close, the minister says, let's all join hands and sing We Shall Overcome. And I was sitting right next to Minister Farrakhan. I knew as soon as he said that one of the newspapers would get a picture of he and I holding hands and would put it on the front page. So I thought for a moment about feigning that I was fainting, that I had gotten sick and fainted so that they'd take me off stage and I wouldn't have to be pictured holding hands with him. And then I thought, that would be a wuss move, and I believe that I'm not a wuss, so I hung in there. But I held hands with Minister Farrakhan on the right, John Street on the left, And I kept leaning towards John Street, hoping that the photograph would capture me and John Street. Unfortunately, big front page photograph in the Daily News, me and Minister Farrakhan holding hands. And as you said, I got grief from the Jewish community about it. But when I ran for re-election a year and a half later, I got about 94, 95% of the Jewish vote.
Exactly. And so I'm a political junkie, as a lot of you who listen to the show are. You'll want to read this chapter and every chapter, whether it's about Bill Clinton, Hillary Clinton, Ed's time as DA, as mayor. For instance, you talked about saving money. When you became mayor, and I like the chapter, one lady, so you went to get a cheesesteak, and the lady said, "We need you, a good Jewish lawyer, to run for mayor." You were unsure what to do because you had just lost 2 elections. You weren't sure.
Right.
So, but then you ran and you won. And not only you won, but then you have another chapter. Your love affair with Philadelphia got you elected governor because you got 70% of the vote in Philly. You got
Suburbs.
And the suburbs, 70, Philadelphia, 90%. Tell us about those 2 chapters.
Well,
go ahead.
Bob makes a very interesting point. I lost 2 elections in 12 months. I lost in the Democratic primary in '86 to Governor Bob Casey, the current Senator Casey's father. Then I ran against Wilson Goode. The business community talked me into it, and I lost again 1 year later in the Democratic primary. And everybody thought I was done. All the political writers wrote me off. But I still had a desire to serve, and I had a little group of 3 or 4 people, Charlie Breslin, Donna Gentile, Thomas Carter, Walter Watson. They were doing some research for me. We made appearances. But I couldn't make up my mind because running again, we were in debt. Midge and I had borrowed money to finance the campaign, so we were in a little bit of debt. It's hard on your family when you lose. People make fun of your son, and Jesse was only 8 years old at the time. So I couldn't make up my mind, and one day I stopped at the bottom of the hill to get a cheesesteak. And this little old Irish lady in a tattered coat was standing there, and she says to me, "Are you Rendell?" And I said, "Yes, ma'am." She said, "Well, are you going to run for mayor again?" And I said, "I don't know. What do you think?" And that was an honest answer because I hadn't decided. And she said, and I'll try to leave out the colorful language, she said, "You have to. This city is so screwed up." She didn't say screwed. She said, "This city is so screwed up, only a smart Jewish lawyer can turn it around." Well, literally, Bob, in that instant, I knew if this lady knew that the city was in that condition and needed someone smart, that I had a chance. And I ran and I won. And interestingly, I say in my chapter about Hillary at the end, I said, "Hillary," I said, "Run, Hillary, run." I meant in 2016. I said, "This country is so screwed up, only a smart woman lawyer can turn it around."
Right, and you said you'd be willing to be the manager of her campaign.
And I wouldn't charge her a nickel. The last time, and, President Obama ran a great campaign, and he's a charismatic speaker and candidate. But Hillary lost that election, in my judgment, because she had bad advice. The people who handled her made a mistake. They didn't portion their money well. They wrote off the caucus states, did everything wrong. And so I do want to run because I think it's time for a woman to lead this country. I think she's got guts and intelligence and great experience. I wanted her to run even before she became Secretary of State, but she's done an absolutely fabulous job as Secretary of State. I think everyone agrees about that, Republican, Democrat, male, female. So I think she'd make a great president.
And I love the pictures up besides this book, A Nation of Wusses, which you have to make a great Father's Day gift. And that's something I'm going to tell you in a minute because Ed talks about his father, who unfortunately passed away when Ed was only 14. He had a brother, Robert, and the father used to take him to baseball games, football games, and Robert and him in 1958, right after the dad died in December, went to one of the best games ever. Why was that one of the best games?
It was Giants versus Colts for the NFL championship. It went into overtime, and it's the famous game where Alan Amici scored the touchdown to win the game for the Colts. And for Robert and I, it was a bittersweet day. I mean, we were excited to be at that great game, but we couldn't obviously not think about our dad.
Right, because he only had 2 tickets. So one week he would take Ed Rendell, another week he would take Robert Rendell.
And, of course, after he died, we had access to both tickets.
Yeah, and I love the picture. I told Ed, I love this book, and you got to, even if you're a sports fan, he talks about how Comcast asked him to